my 6. Today, you get 3 stories in one, all inspired by something that happened just before I got a haircut yesterday. Went into town, sat in the barber's chair, and I heard the sound of loose change hitting the floor. It wasn't my change. I didn't have any change in my pockets, but I instinctively just kind of got out of the chair, bent over, picked up 4 pennies and a dime. And this change had obviously fallen out of the pocket of whoever had sat in the chair before me. So it wasn't mine. I gave it to the barber. And but that dime, when I looked at that dime, I was reminded of 3 stories. One that has to do with synchronicity, because it leads to the second, which definitely was of supernatural nature. And then that leads to the third, which is not about a dime, but a golden conch shell, which is certainly a story of the paranormal. Your treat today is that you get all 3 stories in one. All I ask is that you get my 6 or watch back here behind me, because as of late, it does seem as if we've had some interesting visitors show up to hear our tales. Not surprising. Not new. So the first and second stories are about dimes. The first story is about one dime in particular. It's a dime that I happened to dig up in our backyard when we were living in a certain province in Mindanao, the southernmost major island of the Philippines. This would have been about a dozen years or so ago. We were growing almost all of our own food out of necessity. We had no money. These were during the down and out years of the Philippines, our down and out years in the Philippines. And I was planting a delicious vegetable called conch. It's a green leafy vegetable, very similar to spinach, but it grows faster than a weed. You could buy this at the market. It was very cheap. You get a big bundle of it like this for like 20 pesos, which is like 50 cents. You can soak it in water. Kind of looks like this. I'm just picking something at random here. Wow, this is neat. It does look a lot like this. I just picked this at random. But this part of the leaves were bigger, but it was shaped like this. It had multiple leaves. You could soak it in water and it would root, just like a weeping willow cutting, but quicker. And you could take a cutting of this size with roots and plant it, and within 10 days to 2 weeks, this would vine out and fill a space probably 5 or 6 feet by 5 or 6 feet. And every time you cut it to cook it and eat it, it would grow back quicker. So it's like it was an amazing food source, very delicious. Dearly would grill it, like fry it with a bunch of fresh garlic. And it was just absolutely delicious. Makes my mouth water thinking about it. So I was digging up some soil to plant some of this stuff that I'd rooted in water, and I ended up digging up a dime, a United States dime, dated 1942. It was a piece of history because back in 1942, the U.S. Army was in the Philippine Islands helping the Filipino military kick out the Japanese imperialistic army that had taken over during World War II. So it was like, wow, this dime could tell so many stories. Was it dropped by a USGI? Did a USGI used to live right here where I'm living? Or did he spend it and put it into circulation into the Filipino economy, and then a Filipino at some point dropped the dime? No way of knowing. So, but I took that dime later that afternoon to a place on the beach several blocks away from us where another American lived, and he had set up like a little makeshift bar, and he sold snacks on top of, some beer. But he also, guy's very ingenious. He was a Vietnam veteran, and he had gone over there. He was an expat. He's back in the U.S. now, and he's doing well. He's doing really well. But he spent about maybe 10 or 15 years in the Philippines. He was struggling there for a while. But what he did at his location, and it made it a real hot spot for Westerners that were living over there. He built a stone oven out of rocks, just stones, that he gathered along the beach. And he baked pizza in it. So you got oven-baked pizza. Not only was it the only pizza within like a 3-mile radius drive from anywhere, because we were kind of out in the middle of nowhere, it was the best pizza it may very well be the best pizza I've ever eaten. I mean, better than anything I've had here in the U.S. And so, of course, if you were Western American especially, you would go to this guy's place for pizza. Interesting fact about pizza, it was created originally by an Italian immigrant living in New York. So it is an American food. A lot of people think it's Italian. No, it was made by an Italian immigrant. The reason he made it is because he worked long hours, like 20-hour days, and he was given maybe 5 or 10 minutes to be able to eat his lunch. I mean, this is back early 1900s. That's how it went. And if you weren't willing to do that, you were considered lazy and you had a hard time getting a job, seriously. So what he did, he thought, well, what would I like to eat for lunch? Well, I want some sort of bread, like to have some sauce maybe some meat, maybe some vegetables, a little bit of cheese. He put everything he wanted on this contraption he created, and it became pizza. And he did that so he could eat everything he wanted quickly. He got his meats, his cheese, vegetables, his bread, his sauce. That's how pizza came to be. So anyway, I had that dime with me that day. We're eating pizza, throwing back some cold ones, and I told him about this dime, and he goes, that's so interesting. You finding this dime is kind of bringing back and reminding me, of another story about a dime. And he told me the story. Basically, his father, who had been dead for many years by this point, at the time this guy was in his mid-60s, Vietnam vet. He'd probably be in his mid-70s or late 70s now. His father was a rare coin collector. And he told me that in his father's final days, he had cancer, and he was in the hospital. And he and his brother got the phone call telling them, you need to come say goodbye. So he and his brother were living in different places, but they met up at the airport in Chicago to get on their final flight to fly to where their father was. And he said he was sitting there in the airport, and his brother was sitting beside him, and he was sitting there like this in his chair, and he looked down and he saw on the floor a dime. He picked it up, and I can't for the life of me remember the year. I want to say 1934. But he looked at the date on the dime, and it was a very rare dime. He knew this because his father's hobby was rare coin collecting. And he looked over at his brother, and he said, Dad just died. And his brother said, what? And he handed him the dime. And his brother looked at it, and he looked at the date, and he said, yeah, Dad just died. They looked at their watch and made a mental note, without speaking to each other about this, what time it was. So they boarded their plane, they took their last flight, they got to where the father was in the hospital. When they got there, they weren't surprised to be told upon arrival that their father had passed before they had gotten there. And they said, out of curiosity, what time did he die? And I'm looking over there out of curiosity because I just saw a limb start shaking and moving like this, and nothing is on it. Let me give you a view. I saw no bird, I saw no squirrel, I saw nothing. So anyway, they were told that the time at which their father died was that time in which they found that dime at that airport in Chicago. Now, that's the second story. See, the synchronicity, the first one is that it reminded this guy of the second one, which definitely was supernatural in nature. But this now leads us to the third story, which you'll have to agree after you hear it, had to be paranormal in nature. While this man was telling this story there over the best pizza I've ever had in my life, it's funny, this guy, he was a big man. He was 6'8" and 400 pounds. And he, other than a bit of cushion he's a 65-year-old man, he was not fat. This guy, his arms were just bigger than my legs. I mean, he was huge. I mean, he could have been a WWE wrestler. So we called him Pizza the Hut. Yeah, you Star Wars fans will get that. All right, so anyway, there was a man from Germany sitting there enjoying pizza and having some cold ones, and he spoke very good English, a very learned man, very educated man. He was probably in his 50s. And I'd been small talking with him a little bit before we got to this point. And his situation was this. He lived about another 8 hours south in Mindanao from there. And he was a treasure hunter. Somebody mentioned in the comment section here a couple days ago, asked if I'd ever heard of these treasures left in the Philippines by the Japanese. Yeah, of course. There's so much treasure over there. You had all the Spanish gold that was left behind after the Americans ran the Spanish out in the Spanish-American War in 1898 to 1902 or 3. Japan took a lot of that when they invaded during World War II, but they didn't leave with most of it. They hid a lot of it in caves and other places. But then thirdly, you've got the fact that the Philippines, especially in the south, is situated on what's known as the Pacific Ring of Fire. It's basically a bunch of volcanoes, places where the tectonic plates slip and slide and constantly have earthquakes. The majority of those islands were created by lava. It's one of the richest regions in the world as far as precious metals go. Gold, silver, cadmium, bronze, nickel, copper. This stuff just comes up out of the earth when these volcanoes erupt. A lot of it, the guy from Germany was explaining it thus. He says there are places down there where you could go for miles and miles off of the coast. You're so far out in the water, you look around, you can't see land. Someone or something just threw something at us. Let's look over here again where I saw that limb move earlier. I have reason to believe we're not alone. They're liking this tale. They've come in closer to listen. I don't think they threw that at us to run us off. I think they threw that to let us know they're here. Yeah, I see that. Keep your eyes on it and see if it moves. All right, so anyway, he said you can go out, be so far off the coast you can't see land, and you can get out of your boat and actually stand up and only be waist deep in the water. He said this is because of lava under the water. He said in time, these will be new islands. So, as he explained it, this treasure hunting fascination of his goes back generations. And he had been living in the Philippine Islands for more than a decade. And the only reason he was where he was is because the next day he was going into Davao City, which was still another 3 or 4 hours away, to renew his visa. He had to do this every couple months or whatever, as we all did as we lived there. It's like it was 21 days when I first started going there, but now it's like 30 days, and after that they'll renew it and you get 2 months at a pop. But every 2 months you got to go renew your visa. And it's not much. It's like $75. It's the biggest thing is the inconvenience of having to, take that day to go into immigration. But, we did it. So he was on his way there, but he was telling us a story about his grandfather who had found this golden conch shell, like the kind that's famous for you hold it up to your ear and you can hear the ocean. It's really just your blood circulation that you're hearing, but that's the myth. He said sometimes just the way the precious metals would come up out of the soil or out of the earth when the compression squeezed together and the tectonic plates and gold would pop up. Sometimes they'd capture something, in this case like a conch shell, and completely coat it in gold, and it would solidify and you would have a golden conch shell. So his grandfather moved to the islands from Germany like 2 generations before this. He's telling us a story about something that happened when he was a teenager. He was about 15 or 16 years old. His grandfather was a treasure hunter. He was trying to find, the Japanese gold. Well, actually, the Spanish gold left behind from the Japanese during the war. And his grandfather ended up living there permanently. His wife had passed on years before this. And his grandfather had fallen in love with this beautiful young Filipino girl. Now, the grandfather was like in his 60s at the time. This is a Yellow Jacket. Come on now, Yellow Jacket, get on out of here. This girl, she was like 20. I mean, she was super young, but she was super beautiful. And he just, he met her, he went and talked to her parents, and they really kind of pushed the girl on the guy. He was a man of means. And, but the girl, being pressured by her family, she ended up getting together with this older guy from Germany, but she was in love with her 20-year-old Filipino boyfriend, and she never cut that off. Now, the old man had his suspicions, but he never questioned her because he always felt maybe it's better don't ask, don't tell type situation. But he had gotten word about this golden conch that was in one of these locations miles off the coast, but in such an area where you could get out of the boat and stand up and the water was only waist deep. So he would search and he would search and he would search for this conch. And after looking and looking and never finding it, he had one more location where he felt confident this conch would be, but it was an area that was constantly plagued by storms just coming up from out of nowhere, volcanic eruptions, earthquakes, it was a very messy area. So he put together a crew on a boat to go out and look for this golden conch in this particular area. His wife, who had married by this time, he'd married this young Filipino girl, 20 years old. She wanted to go with him, and he'd never taken her. But she really wanted to go, and so he said, okay, you can come. We're putting together a crew. Well, she insisted on this one particular young man being part of that crew. And his grandfather knew there are footsteps right beside me, but there's nothing there. Look. You can hear that. It sounds as if something walked right there and sat down to listen. And there's nothing there. I guess I'll just keep telling the story. So begrudgingly, the old man agrees to allow this young Filipino man to be part of the crew to go looking for this golden conch. Well, they get out there. They get to their destination. Skies are clear. Not a cloud in the sky. The water wasn't as shallow as they thought. They had to do some snorkeling and some deep sea diving. But they found the conch. And it was big. It was 2.5 feet wide. And they'd taken a vessel where everybody on the vessel had to sit pretty much compact, shoulder to shoulder. So somebody would have had to have held this golden conch on the way back. Because, it would take up as much space on the seat as a person, one of the crew members. So they got the conch in the boat, and just as everybody was coming back in from their diving and getting back in, this storm We have found our culprit. Perhaps not a Bigfoot, Sasquatch, or a ghost, or a monster, but it's a baby box turtle. Isn't it so cute? All right, baby, we're going to let you back down. Well, I know that would have made for a creepier video if I didn't show you what was making the sound, but one of the things I do here is I'm always honest. If we hear or see something that is a deer or a bear or a fox, or in this case a turtle, I'm honest about it. That was creepy though. It sounded like this thing was coming over to sit there right beside me to hear the story. Wasn't that cute? As a little box turtle, tiny little thing. I bet you there's dozens of it, dozens just like that right here close by, because it's not very old. So anyway, yeah, that was this year's turtle. That thing just hatched here not too long ago. So anyway, storm came in. Violent storm, thunder, the tectonic plate shifted, steam started coming up out of the water. It was a mess. They had to get out of there as quick as they could. Well, everybody was in the boat. They start rowing away. But then they realized that this young man, the lover of the old man's wife, was not in the boat. And somebody saw him out there in the distance splashing around, calling for help. And the conch shell was sitting right there beside this guy's wife and beside another crew member. And his wife was begging and pleading for him to go back and get this other crew member, which the old man knew was her lover. Well, he absolutely refused. He said, no, we're not going back. It's too dangerous. We're not going to risk the lives of all men. Wow, check this out. There's a deer. That's a doe. And she's got a little fawn right behind her. See the little fawn right there in the center? Look at that. Isn't that cute? They're like 15 yards away from me. And I hear that turtle over there. Tell you, that deer was so close that if she hadn't had that fawn with her, I could have just gone over there and milked her. But she's being taken care of, obviously. Anyway, people are often like, gosh, can't you just stick to the story? You wander off on all these different things. You prattle too much. You ramble too much. Man, this is like living in a nature preserve here. And these animals aren't afraid of me. They just walk by all the time. Sometimes bears come up. And other times, potentially other things. All right, back to the story. So the old man refused to go get this one crew member. He refused to risk the lives of all crew members to save one. Of course, his young wife knew that he knew without knowing that he knew. You know what I mean? So she gave him this very hateful, spiteful look. She grabbed that golden conch and she threw herself into the ocean with it. He reached over to try to grab her, to save her. And he missed her, but he grabbed the conch, was able to pull it back into the boat, but she went under and she was never seen again. So the boat made it back. They lost his wife. They lost the young crew member who, as it turned out, was the wife's lover. But he had his conch, and he had a special room in his house where he kept his treasures, his special findings. I guess he would leave the country every few years to go back and sell these pieces in Europe, around Europe, Germany, and other places. So enter now the grandson who's telling me this story at Pizza the Hut's pizza bar there on the beach. When he was 16 or 17 years old, he had gone to visit his grandfather. He'd made the trip halfway around the world, well, a quarter of the way around the world, because he's from Europe. Went in there, and he arrived late. His grandfather was already asleep, and the maid, or the yaya they call it, said, here, you sleep in this room. You sleep in this, which ended up being the treasure room. So there was a couch in there, and she laid out blankets on the couch, prepared it as a bed for him. So he lays down. He couldn't sleep because of the time zone difference. I couldn't imagine what it is. It's 12 hours from us here. This is as far away as you can get. you know, because it's 24 hours a day. It's a full 12-hour time difference from Germany, maybe 6 hours. So he's there. Just as he starts to fall asleep, he hears water dripping. He opens his eyes, and this golden conch was on top of a mantle in a fireplace that was never used. They built a fireplace when they built this hut for appearances, because it's so hot over there, you don't need one for heat. But it looked good. It looked Westernish, and the golden conch was there on the mantle. So the guy says he opened his eyes because he heard the sound of dripping water, and here, shrouded with seaweed soaking wet, water dripping from them, was this beautiful young Filipino woman and this handsome young Filipino man, and they're reaching for this conch shell. Well, he thought they were being robbed, so he jumps up off the couch, and he grabs the conch shell, gets it in his arms like this, and just as he secures it, these two entities just disappear. They vanish. He's looking around left to right, and they're gone. They're not even there. So he puts the conch shell back on the mantle. The next morning, you know, he's talking to his grandfather. He tells him about the situation. He goes, you know, Granddad, you got to find a better place to hide that conch shell because you almost got robbed last night. And he told him about these two people. And the grandfather asks him to describe them. What did they look like? And he did. And he goes, show me. They go in there, and they find there just in front of the mantle on the floor, there's still some water and there's some seaweed. And so the grandfather said, tonight I will sleep in this room. Notice how it just got a lot quieter? So that night, the grandfather slept in that room. He let the grandson sleep in his place, in his bedroom. They shut the door. The grandfather asked them to lock the door from the outside so no one could get in, no one could get out. They did. The next morning, when they opened the door, the grandfather was dead. He was lying on the couch, died apparently from a heart attack. The golden conch was gone, and there was fresh water and fresh seaweed on the floor in front of the mantle where the conch had been. So this man in his 50s now, having pizza and some cold ones there at Pizza the Hut's place, told us that, you know, it wasn't long after that he started coming to the Philippines regularly, and now he had been living there for a considerable period, 10 or 15 years straight. He's looking for this golden conch. So there's your story. Now, as far as any of you who are wondering about how Daniel and Dearly are doing, they're doing great. They didn't do their retest today because they got all the way to the place where they were supposed to test, and Daniel threw up all over the taxi they were in and all over his mom, so they had to go home. But they'll be testing tomorrow, and we'll be keeping you updated. Dearly made a video about it. I'll try to remember to put it on the end of this one. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed these 3 stories in one. All true, or at least as they were told to me. The one about the dime I found is true, and the other 2, as they were told to me, I believe are true. I have no reason to doubt the storytellers. See you for more next time from here at Homesteading Off the Grid, and whatever in the hell this channel's about.